October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Here in New York City, there is a nonprofit helping domestic violence survivors and those needing help by providing shelter and support. Joining us now to discuss are Nathaniel Fields, CEO of Urban Resource Institute, and Hope Dawson-Sessoms, domestic violence survivor and advocate. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Nathaniel, let's start with you. Tell us about Urban Resource Institute.
Absolutely, but first I need to thank you and CBS for taking just a moment to talk about domestic violence. It's so important to increase awareness, particularly during this month. Let me just ground on the issue and I'll talk to you about Urban Resource Institute, URI. You and your listeners have probably heard that 1 out of every 3 and 1 out of every 4 females to males will be impacted by domestic violence. We know that in New York City, about 250,000 calls, domestic violence incident reports were answered by the police department. And our own hotline answered over 90,000 calls. When you think about crime going down in the city, you heard organizations like the URI say, yes, but. And the but was, major crime did go down in New York City, and we should salute people responsible for that. However, we didn't talk about domestic violence going up by about 29%, right? Wow. By about 29%, disproportionately impacting the Black and brown community. So URI, Urban Resource Institute, that's why we exist, to partner with survivors, to partner with communities, to take out the complexity and understand the risk factors. So many people talk about how complex it is and what are those risk factors. So we organized the Urban Resource Institute 40 years ago to really understand these risk factors and then to do something about it.
And I was going to say, Hope, as a domestic violence survivor, what are some of the common misconceptions that you want people to understand?
Yes, thank you for having me also, by the way. And much like Nat was talking about as far as the complexities of domestic violence, I feel like the first thing is actually us redefining or fully understanding what domestic violence is. Because for myself, I didn't even realize that I was in a domestic violent relationship. I wouldn't have classified myself as such. Of course, there was violence, right? But at the same time, I didn't fully understand because it didn't look like what I saw on TV. But then when I think about that, maybe it did. Because I can distinctly remember watching certain movies and television shows where I could see these signs leading up to like the big dramatic scene, and I would say I knew that was going to happen, as opposed to identifying that it already was. Prior to the dramatic scene, prior to the hospital scene, it was already occurring. And I think if we address the stigmas associated with how we define and understand domestic violence, then more people will leave. A lot of times we normalize what people call toxic traits or toxicity. We normalize toxicity until it becomes tragedy, and then we see it as such. And so from my perspective, that's the first step, is understanding that domestic violence happens long before, most times, the physical. It starts with a mental breakdown, there's financial, there's debt coercion, there's all types of abuse, there's all types of domestic violence, and we just need to more thoroughly examine that idea.
Nathaniel, where do you think, New York City could improve on protecting those experiencing domestic violence?
This work around prevention, it's hard to always quantify or show the impact of prevention. We know we need to do more of that. So we need to double down on our prevention, just like what we're doing today. Let's talk about awareness. Let's have Hope and other survivors talk about what is domestic violence, that you're not alone. There are people there to help you. So let's do more awareness. New York City should do awareness campaigns, not just during October, but throughout the year. So we started, URI about 10 years ago, started People and Animals Living Safely, where we were the first provider in New York City to allow victims of domestic violence to bring their pets with them into a domestic violence shelter. Groundbreaking at the time because people wouldn't leave. And we know during times of crises, people need their pets. I want to say the other part of the work, we always need to have spaces for victims, survivors of domestic violence. We also need to turn more attention to those causing harm. We don't talk about it enough, right? They need to be held accountable. Well, Cindy, what camera? I want to say directly to the listeners out there, if you are causing harm, there's help for you. You do not need to continue to hurt people. Organizations like the Urban Resource Institute We have abusive partner intervention programs. We created these programs because many survivors said, I may not be ready to leave. I want the violence to stop. And we also recognize if we don't intervene, they will only go on to abuse other individuals.
Thank you for sharing your story and for all the work you both do. We really, really appreciate it. And like you said, the important thing is to talk about it. It shouldn't be in the dark. And there is no shame to get help.
Yep.
So
Yes.
thank you.
Can I say one more thing, Cindy?
Sure.
I just think Hope is just an amazing person.
She is, and I love her name, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. And if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE or text START to 88788.